Hello, welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Dave, and today I'm hanging out with Eloy Lasanta. Hopefully I'm not butchering your name because I can't speak. From Third Eye Games and New Agenda Publishing. How are you doing today, sir?
Doing good, doing good. Thanks for having me on again. I think this is my second time being
It is. We did this a few years back, so I'm happy to have you on again. I appreciate you coming back. I've always enjoyed our conversations. So, how's your apocalypse going?
The apocalypse is hopefully being prevented.
Yeah. You're down.
That's all I can say.
You're down there in like Florida, right?
Oh yeah. I'm in Florida. I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah.
I keep me and my kids inside, and hope that the world comes to its senses outdoors.
Yeah.
So-
Well, we're in New Jersey, so we're like we were at ground zero.
Oh god.
Things are getting better here now, though. So.
That's good. I mean, it's while the cases are going up, the death rate is going down, so that's good. But
Yeah.
I wish the former would start also going down. So
Yeah. Well, they started opening up things here, and they had some other things scheduled to open up, and then our governor was like, nope, people don't know how to act. I'm turning this thing right around.
That's pretty much what happened here. We
Yeah.
had our governor came out and said, we're never going to shut things down. A week later, hey, we're shutting things down. 2 weeks later, hey, we're going to open back up. And then a week after that, we're going to have to shut stuff back down. So
Yeah.
that's basically what's happening here.
So we never got to the re-shutting thing down stage because Murphy just kind of looked and saw what was going on and said, nah, we're just gonna wait.
Yeah.
Which is fine by me. I mean, it sucks, but what are you gonna do?
That's pretty much the gist of it.
Yeah. So are you getting any gaming in while you're locked down?
I've actually gotten a few games in here and there online with my friends. What ends up happening though is what you're seeing behind me now is my formless office. I actually just moved in a couple of days ago, so there's nothing in here right now. But leading up to me actually getting my office back again, I have not had a quiet place that I could do an online game. So it was almost impossible for me to be like, hey, I'm gonna go play a game and not have constant interruptions.
Yeah.
So hopefully now that I do have an office, I'll be able to jump back into that. But then again, I have so many things going on, and projects and YouTube channels and all that stuff that getting in a game, it basically becomes like a thing of priorities, right? Like, do I want to get together and play with my friends, or do I want to finish this game? It's like that time can be spent on one or the other, but not both. So
That's the great lie of getting into games, right? It's like you're like, I'm going to get into games and I will play so many more games, and then you're like, oh, I'm not playing games at all.
I play a whole lot more of my games, but I don't necessarily get to play as many other companies' games, and that's not a bad thing, because I play games that I enjoy. I make the games that I want to play and everything, but at the same time, there is a little bit there. Like, I do love playing other people's games as well. So when I do get the opportunity, it is great.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I was like, well, hopefully then you're playing games you like.
Yeah. Or I'm playing games I've never played before, because I love playing new games, because as a game designer, I like to pick them apart and figure out what works and why this is good and why that's bad, and and what I would change and things like that. So
I also like playing new games, but I have to confess, I do not like learning new games. I just want to show up and play and be like, all right, we'll figure it out as we go.
Well, I'm a tactile learner, personally. So what ends up happening with me is, if I jump into a game, I can read the book and I will understand it, mathematically, logically in my brain, but I never really get a sense of how the game is until I play it. So I'll even be like, oh, that's what that rule meant. Even if it was written in perfect English, that's just not how I learn. I learn by the doing. So yeah, that's just how, yeah.
I think a lot of people are that way. I mean, I learn much better that way anyway. Like, if you give me several hundred pages of RPG book to read, I'll read it, understand it, and then almost immediately forget it if I don't begin applying it. It's like, I only have so much RAM, and then I just have to start deleting.
Pretty much. I mean, but I do love, I love writing rules. And that's actually one of the things that I try to do when I write rules in any of my games is I've now played that game so much that I can't just tell you the rule. I have to tell you the rule and then give you one or two examples. Like, because again, like that is as close to a tactile learning experience that I can give you in a book. You know what I mean? Is to be like, here's a rule and this is how it works. Now here's an example. This person rolls that and gets this. And you can even like, you can recreate whatever that is like in front of you with your own dice and be like, oh, okay, from the example it makes a lot more sense. And that's why like in a lot of my games, even ones that aren't like the pip system, which explicitly has like this is exactly how this works, in its writing. But even in my other games, I always have lots and lots of examples because that's how I learn a game as well. So it's important for me to give as many tools as I can to whoever's reading the book.
So before we get started, we're talking a little bit about what you're working on, Outrun, which, by the way, the art looks fantastic over there. I mean, it's like one of the first things I look. I guess everyone does, but the art looks so good.
Yeah, Jerry Grayson, one of the co-owners of New Agenda, he is in charge of the art direction, and there's been like a couple of things that I'm like, that's not how I originally imagined it, but that's pretty damn cool. So I'll be like, let me change the text to now fit with what the art, because you had this idea and I was over here, but no, Jerry is a wonderful art director. I will definitely give that to him. He's also doing the majority of the layout.
Okay.
So that works, and then I did the majority of like the game design of the mechanics itself. Misha did a lot of the world building. Misha Bushjaeger, she did a lot of the world building part of it and coordinating a lot of the freelancers and making sure that everything kind of gets together in the right way. So that's kind of like the work breakdown of it all. Which is why, again, I told you this before we started recording, but that's why like Outrun is still in the works, because I decided to change a bunch of mechanics that, when it was done, it was basically done. And then I'm like, nah, I need to change a bunch of stuff now. So I'm a perfectionist in that way. But I definitely want to make sure that the right, the best product that we can put out is what we get into people's hands.
So what is Outrun?
So Outrun it's an Afrocentric sci-fi setting that we created. It's really cool because it mixes a lot of sci-fi and like metaphysical kind of spiritual things. But it's essentially kind of our take on like a whole bunch of different like mishmashes of different things. Think like Star Wars and Star Trek and all your general ones that Mass Effect, all those, but like mixed with Yabaru, like spirituality and stuff like that. It's actually really cool the way that it all kind of came out, and it's very different than I would say any other sci-fi game that I've played, which is why it's worthy of actually being released, because if it wasn't different, then why do it? So
what is the core mechanic for the system?
The core mechanic, it's called the Horizon system. It's a system that I created because I need another system under my belt. You roll 2d10 and like you compare your roll to a chart. The chart is static, so like if you roll a 22, but I believe it's an 18 to 22, then that's like a normal success. Below that is like a half success, that there's like number ranges. So you have your 2d10, you're always rolling 2d10 against the chart. And then the game system is essentially what's going to give you penalties, what's going to give you bonuses to your roll. So if you roll 20, like 2 10s, that's amazing, obviously. But if you also had bonuses from your skills, bonuses from your auras, bonuses from environmental things, but then also the challenge rating, and then also this environmental thing is bad, and then this spell is on you, and so there's like a lot of things that can make you get bonuses or penalties to whatever you end up rolling.
Is it rules light or rules heavier?
I'd say that it's much like most of my games. I would say it's rules medium. I would say this one is verging on rules light. Like it's more leaning towards rules light, because again, like a lot of the math and everything is kind of done for you, because there's just you roll your number, add or subtract, and then you compare it to a chart. So that's like the easy way of like doing it. But I would say it's also mostly modular. So you can also say we're just going to go straight rolls, or we can be like, let's add in like every modifier that we could ever think of. So I would say that you can, take or leave little bits of it here and there.
Okay. So we had a question from Doug runs our website. From a design perspective, thoughts on how rules affect storytelling goals of the game? Follow up preference of rules light, heavy, and effect on storytelling.
That's good. I mean, good question. What I would say is that rules have to inform the gameplay experience. So you don't want, like, you could have like a whole setting, and you could say like, oh well, there's a lot of political espionage and there's lots of mystery and spies and cat burglars. But if like half your book is how to punch somebody, that's not investigating, that's not thieving, that's not, it's like your rules have to inform the gameplay. That's why when I created Part-Time Gods, for instance, Part-Time Gods second edition, when it came out, and I'm still developing the latest book just came out earlier this year. And I'm working on the third and the fourth right now. Of course I am. But no, when I created that game, the entire conceit of the game is that you are a new god who is trying to kind of create your territory and take divine command over what you're the god of, but you have a life that wants to invade and kind of take over. You have a mortal life. You might have kids, job, all those things. So I had to create mechanics to do that. And because you could just say, yeah, that happens, but that then puts it upon the GM to make it happen, but it's not part of the game unless you make it part of the game. So that's basically where game design comes in. So I created a free time mechanic. So when you run out of free time, you then have to kind of deal with, your mortal side of your life, or you can not deal with it. And then those relationships start to degrade, and then you start to lose your humanity and like all of this stuff. So that's kind of the route that took. But also when it came to, the divine territory, in first edition, we talked about it very kind of, theoretical. You have divine territory. It's there. Trust us. But, in second edition, I actually created a territory map as part of the mechanics. So you can actually say, this is where my divine territory is. So it actually works out really well. And the game experience is much better now that it's actually translated in the rules. It's now part of it, not just something we're throwing on there.
So when you describe some of those aspects from Part-Time Gods, that makes me think very, very individualistic. Yet, tabletop RPGs tend to be co-ops where you're working with a group of people. So how do you integrate that aspect of the game?
So in that particular type of game, it is individualistic, but also group-based, because you are a god, but also the other players are obviously also gods. And you are a pantheon because you are the gods of this city. Like, that's basically the setup. Because there's free time, and some people will have more free time than others. Some people will have more money than others. Some people will have more divine territory than others. What that allows you to do is to share those kind of resources. So if you have somebody that's rich, they end up a lot of the time shelling out a lot of like the money that's necessary to like set up bases and like bribe people and all of that stuff, but they don't have the free time to go and do stuff because they have to go make that money. So you end up with those characters that have lots of free time, kind of going out and kind of filling in where some of the other characters can't do it. So I actually had one game that I ran, and it was actually a lot of fun because, and this is kind of how the free time mechanic here works. Because I was like, all right, cool. So you've investigated this thing. You have this person you have to go and now talk to get more information to follow the bad guy, typical MacGuffin kind of thing. So I was like, so who's going to go do that? Who's going to go do what? And the group was like, well, I'm out of free time, so I'm going to go to work. So that's like one character was like, I'm out. The other person was out of free time, so they decided they were going to go and mess around with their worshipers to kind of, because they had used their worshipers earlier, so they needed to go and repair that relationship a little bit. So that's what they're going to do with their time. The other person had their family call them that they had to go and attend because they picked the privileged occupation. So I was like, you have to go and attend an event for your family. So that's what you're being called to do. And I was like, but all of you can say no to these things. But they're like, no, I think we need to go do that. And it was interesting because then that actually left the only character that had free time left was the one character who was like the worst to go and interrogate this person. So, but they were all like, yes, this is what we want to have happen in this game. We want the person who is terrible at this to go do this now. And we're all going to duck out. We're all going to go do our thing now. So, and in a game like Part-Time Gods, you do end up having a little bit more of split parties. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not impeding on the game. It's not in a way that takes away from the experience, because that is the experience. Like that's so it's because, if you're in a Dungeons and Dragons game, you're like, we need to have our group together. We need to go and kill the thing and loot its body, and then go to the next thing to kill and loot that thing, and trash the town or kill whoever's in front of us. And if we don't have all of us there at any time, at every given fight, then we will lose. And that is just what happens. But in a game like Part-Time Gods, the experience is, hey, there's this big thing happening over here, but can I deal with it? Like, do I have the time to deal with that and also not damage, my relationships with my family and friends and job and all of that stuff? Like, that's what the game is.
Nice. So yeah, it sounds like it's a great way to teach players how to share the spotlight as well.
Yes.
And also, I feel like it would require a DM to understand how to manage that time to kind of like keep everyone from being like voyeurs for most of the game.
Well, and oh gosh, the most of the time my GM chapters that I write in books are like 5-6 pages of just like advice, general advice. Here's how you run the game. But like the GM chapter for Part-Time Gods is easily 20 pages, because I give lots of information on how to handle that. Not only how to pace the game, how to manage people's free time, their money, what happens if you leave where the territory map would be, so there's lots and lots of information in that book to make sure that you know how to run that. Because again, I've played it, a million times as written. So then, and the GM chapter is always the last thing that I write.
Mm-hmm.
So I make the whole game, I run it a ton, and then I say, okay, here are the important things that you need to know to run this game.
So we have a question from Brian.
Mm-hmm.
Are there any resources for game mechanics that you reference, like a list of existing dice mechanics, for example, to get a sense of what others have already done?
No, there's not necessarily any resource that I use. What I do is I just try to stay an active supporter of other people's games, as I like to say. So, for instance, when I was coming out with Ampere 1, that's my Supers game, I was like, okay, well, before I make a Supers game, because I have an okay idea, this is kind of what I want to do, but I need to make sure that I want to make sure that I'm not going to replicate what somebody else has already done. I need to make sure that my idea is different enough. So I went out and got Mutants and Masterminds. I already owned Aberrant, so that was an easy one. I basically went out and purchased as many super RPGs as I could and consumed them, read through them. I played most of them. I didn't play all of them. Some of them I'm like, I get the gist. But in the end, I was like, what I'm doing here is different enough to justify it being a new game, and that people will dig the niche that it kind of fills. So that's kind of what I do personally. There might be resources and stuff for that, but I know that there's lots of different dice mechanics out there. I do try to be as original with any of the games that I create. I've created I think 5 systems so far. that they're mostly just used for my own games. but I enjoy that aspect of challenge as well. So I'm like, like my first game was I was like I wanted to make a game that just used a single D20 for everything. That was my first game. Then I made a different D10 game. So I was like, I want D10 pools, but it needs to feel different than any other D10 pool game out there. Then I created one that uses playing cards, because I had played a couple of games that use playing cards, and I'm like, this is kind of interesting. I wonder what I could do with this. And then I created one because, and I tell this story occasionally, but I was playing a lot of Fiasco at the time, so I had like these two things of like white and black dice, white and black D6s, and then my friends and stuff, we started playing less Fiasco, so I just basically had these black and white dice just sitting there not doing anything. So I said, I could make a system using black and white dice. Let's do that, so that I have a use for these again. And that's actually where the pip system came from. Is my daughter was like, I want to play games, and I'm like, let me make a game from this then. And it was super easy to like understand and stuff. And then that evolved into the pip system. So thank you, Fiasco, for making me buy D6s. And then it turned into a whole family kids, genre for my company.
I want to say, just like reading over the list of games you've made, like niche games is kind of your niche.
Well, it is. Well, because that's what I do. I try to find holes. I try to find like, because there's lots of different games out there, but it's like, is there a game that does like this?
Right.
Like even for Mermaid Adventures, like when my daughter was like, I want to role play, and I'm like, what do you want to role play? She's like, she was really into Little Mermaid at the time, so I was like, well, let me find a Little Mermaid RPG. Guess what? Wasn't one. There wasn't any mermaid RPG. There were RPGs where you could play mermaids. Like you could technically kind of play mermaids in a couple of games, but mostly mermaids were like antagonists or NPCs and stuff, but not play as. So I was like, well, I guess I got to make a game then. So it's just how that works out sometimes. I mean, when you're a game designer.
Going over the titles, and just so people that maybe haven't heard of Third Eye Games before: AMP Year One, Apocalypse Prevention Inc., HP Lovecraft Preparatory Academy, Ninja Crusades, Part-Time Gods, Sins of the Father. Yep. Yeah, they're all very evocative, and like they're oftentimes a string of words I might not have put together. I mean that in a good way.
No. I believe it. It's been a fun ride, and I've kind of become known as the person. I just follow the inspiration. I try not to typecast myself. I like to write all kinds of different things. I like all kinds of different media and stuff like that. So I remember the first year that I wrote Mermaid Adventures, and I brought it to Gen Con as like my brand new game. So you have like demon hunters with like lots of blood and like guts, and then you have ninjas with like nasty like ninja battles and all that stuff, and you have Part-Time Gods, which is like these god wars and modern and all that stuff, and then you have like Mermaid Adventures, which is like a little kiddie game that from the outside looking in, it's got depth and whatnot, but it's like a kid's game, just kind of fun, really good for teaching, and it didn't fit. Like people were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you coming out with a Mermaid Adventures game? Like, that's silly, because this is what you do. You don't do this thing over here. And I'm like, oh, no. I do that too. Like that's my brand now, is that you don't know what the hell I'm going to do next. So
nice. Do you have what's coming down the line after you finish Overrun? Have you thought that far ahead? Well, obviously you have. You're like, I got book 3 and 4 I'm working on as I finish book 2.
Yeah, I got 2 more books for Part-Time Gods, and I have 1 more book right now that's currently in the works for Ninja Crusade. We have some Savage Worlds conversions coming for API, so that's going to be fun. I do like that. Some Savage Worlds and 2nd edition API conversions for the 1st edition books. We actually have those. I have the first one already done. I just need to actually go through it, because again, quarantine has made it so that I'm not doing anything really right now, but soon I will hopefully be jumping into it. But no, the newest things like Sins of the Father just had a couple of new things come out, so I'm not working on anything specifically for Sins of the Father right now. The pip system primers have been coming out quarterly, which is really cool because I have an amazing pip system team that I assembled before quarantine. So even after I kind of was like, hey guys, I'm not doing nothing for like 3 months. They're like, cool, we'll get the next primer out for you. Check you later. And I'm like, oh, it's so great that I have these people who are, I can trust them to, and pay them. I can trust them to go ahead and do it without like me having to be like the guiding hand, making sure it happens. And like we're still releasing, pip system primer stuff, which is nice. We're coming out with Kids Guide to Monster Hunting. That's coming out for pip system pretty soon here. I actually have I believe the final docs that I need to go through to make sure that they're ready for editing. I'm working on a couple of other pip system things. We're about to open up the pip system, the pip worlds for community content on drive-through. That's the thing we've been talking about this week on all of our social medias, because we're finally opening up the pip system for anybody to create stuff for that system. So that should be nice.
What is the pip system for people that don't know?
Oh, the pip system is a game that it started off with Mermaid Adventures, which I've already talked about. Then it went into Infestation, which is an RPG of bugs and heroes, where you play bugs, which is fun. But those were my first two like kind of games playing around with this system. But I kind of just got so many different people who would say like, there's so much, you could do so much with this system. I'm like, I know you can't you? So I decided to write up a whole pip system core book. And I say I wrote it up. I wrote like half of the book, but I did bring in other people to help me, so I'm not going to take 100% credit for that. But as soon as the core book was done, then now it's time that we start releasing setting guides and stuff like that, just to kind of go along with the core rules. And the core rules are you have white dice, which are positive dice, you have black dice that are negative dice, and you kind of put them together, you roll them, and you're hoping that you have more successes on your white dice than your black dice. And that can be colored in a lot of different ways, in terms of like what gives you white dice, what gives you black dice, or positive or negative dice, however you want to say it. And what we've done is, in addition to like the main like big settings that I've released through Third Eye Games, we've also 2 years ago actually we started Pip System Primers, which is every quarter we come out with a package of like a new genre or whatever that you can add into the game. So we've done noir, we've done dinosaurs, we've done time travel, we've done all these different things that are just like, here's additional rules that you can add into the pip system to emulate this new genre. So I mean, we have done it for 2 years because I have an annual part 1 and an annual issue number 2, and we're going, this is year 3 that we're doing the pip system primer, and we've had a lot of success with that. So the fact that we've been doing that and the settings and the core book and everybody really loving the game is why we had a lot of people asking, can we open this up for community content? So after discussing it obviously with the team and with Drive-Thru RPG, decided that was actually a cool thing to do, as long as you don't like try to copy paste and then sell your stuff, but they have rules against that sort of stuff. But I'm really, really excited about seeing what other people come up with for the pip system. I'm very, very excited about that.
So is that your oldest system?
What's that?
Is that your oldest system? What is the first one for you?
The first system I made was the dynamic gaming system. That was the one that used only a single D20 for everything. And that's actually API runs off of that still, and AMP runs off of that, but a modified version. So I have 2 games that run off of that system. Then I have the Chakra system, and Ninja Crusade and Part-Time Gods run off of the Chakra system. And then the pip system is Mermaid Adventures and Infestation and Kids Guide and a bunch of other stuff that's going to come out later. And then Sins of the Father has its own system, because that's the one that I made from cards, and it doesn't even have a name because I made it specifically for that game. Like I I don't even know how I could take that system I created for Sins of the Father and adapt it to something else. It's the Sins of the Father system. It's for that game.
Now,
So
the card system in that game are the cards the randomizer or are they a resource management tool?
both.
Okay.
Yeah. And then again, like I went out and I tried to play as many games that kind of utilized cards. And what I found is most games actually only utilize them as an additional part of the game. Few games actually use cards as the mechanic. So I wanted to use it as the mechanic. So you have your deck there, and you pull cards in order to do things. You pull cards in order to use powers. You might lose cards as health. Essentially, when you get down to the bottom of your deck, that's a bad thing. So it is also, so it's like, do I want to do this? That sort of kind of push and pull. And of course, as the GM of that kind of game, my job is to make you get rid of your cards. So I will throw many an obstacle in front of people, lots of different scenarios, and it's my job to make you run out of cards. So that's fun. It's a great mechanic.
So what happens after you run out of cards?
Well, the whole Sins of the Father is a game about debt, spiritual debt. So essentially, Sins of the Father is your parents or your great-grandparents, somewhere in your family line, all your family's souls were sold off to some sort of Dark Lord of some sort. And it's actually your Dark Lord, whatever you serve, is actually generated randomly. So it could be, I give examples in the book, but you could make up something on the spot if you wanted to. So the game is based on debt. You start off with a certain amount of debt. If you want more power, you have to take on more debt. If you want your Dark Lord to intervene in some way, that's going to take on debt. If you want, special cool abilities, that's going to take debt. If you die and don't feel like dying, that takes on debt. If you run out of cards, you take on more debt. So it's basically my job is to make you take on more debt and to, lure you in, entice you. Your Dark Lord can take care of that for you if you want, that sort of thing. And in the end, you have some characters who just have so much debt, and they are all in on this. And that game also has generational rules. So when you're done with those characters, you then can write up your kids, because that's the game. Your parents gave it to you.
Yeah.
You got to give it to your kids now.
The ultimate.
It's a fun game.
It's the ultimate kicking the can down the road.
Pretty much, yeah. And when we came out with the Sins of the Father Companion, that was actually the latest thing that came out, just not long ago, actually, maybe 6 months ago. The Sins of the Father Companion, I gave a lot more resources on like how you might get rid of your debt, and if you wanted to do blah blah blah, stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because that's the game. What I found is that that's the game people wanted to play. They didn't want to play this like person who has all this debt, who has been raised by terrible people in a terrible world, and they're kind of terrible. They want to play like, oh no, but I want to get rid of my debt and like free my family. And I was like, okay, fine. Here's some stuff that you can do with that, but that's not really the game. It's like you can do that now, but what we've actually there's ways to do it, but it's basically just giving up debt to one thing for debt for another at this point.
They all want the redemption arc.
Yeah, and the redemption arc comes at a cost now, and there are rules for it now in the Sins of the Father Companion, so feel free to check that out. Because that was a fun book to write, and that was actually the book that we decided to figure out how to use that system for different things. So we wrote up different genres. So in the Sins of the Father Companion, like there's like the sci-fi genre. So instead of being modern like urban fantasy, you can be like the corporation is your Dark Lord, and now you are an agent of the corporation going and doing these terrible things. Or the Dark Lord is a lich, and you are now all fantasy servants of that lich. So we wrote up those different kind of things in the Sins of the Father Companion to kind of give you a way to play it in different ways. But again, like I wouldn't know how to write a brand new game using that same mechanic, because it just does a specific thing so well. making it trying to tweak it to make it do something else, I don't think would work, or it could work but would be bad. Like, if that makes sense, like, because there are things like I have Aberrant, which is actually one of my favorite Supers RPGs, for like 1 or 2 sessions, because beyond the second session it just gets completely broken. But I love that system, and when they came out with D20 Aberrant, I immediately went out and bought it because I wanted to see how dumb it was.
Yeah.
Because it did not work as a D20 game. It just doesn't. It loses all flavor. It lost everything that was cool and special about it. It did make it so that you could play it for longer than 2 sessions, but is that a good thing? That's not necessarily what that game is. So, there you go. There's my take on that. Sorry, I'll stop rambling.
That's okay. Nah, you brought up something that was interesting to me, and like we recently had a little bit of this. Is like you make a thing and you release it, and you have an expectation on how it's going to be used, but then the people that are fans of it go, no, we don't use it that way. This is what we actually want.
Well, there's a reason. There's usually a reason why whatever I come up with was niche in the first place. Yeah. Why there wasn't a game for that. Because then people are like, oh, well, I really like your game, but I want to do this with it, which is the thing that all the other games do.
Yeah.
And it's like, but that's not what I designed. Like Part-Time God, it's like, well, what happens when you become a full-time God? And I'm like, that's not the game. So it's like the game is specifically called Part-Time Gods. If you want to play a full-time God, go play like Gods of Mankind, or go play Nobilis, or go like those games do that out the gate. That's not what I wrote though. So it's just interesting why people, but I think that's the mentality, right? Like I've been at conventions and I'll be like, hey, I have an open slot. Do you want to play? I only play Savage Worlds. All right. I like Savage Worlds too, but to only to profess your love for a single game that boldly, and you have people who only play this game or only play that game. And I've never been that way. Even my own games are not the only game that I play, which is why I have so many different systems, so many different games. Like I'm always constantly experimenting and trying to play new things, trying to do new things, because I don't want to do the same thing forever. Like, like I want to do different things.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. Like I have a default game, but I think that has more to do with comfort. And like I said earlier, I generally don't have a lot of time to learn a lot of new games. Yeah. But if someone goes, "Hey, do you want to play this game?" and all I have to do is show up, I'm totally there.
That's how it was with Champions. Yeah. Like, I've never made a character using Champions, mostly just because I've heard about it. But I go and I play Champions at cons, because once the characters are made, the system's actually really fun and engaging. But it's the daunting nature of making a character in that system. Yeah, that's the thing that drives some people away. But for me, I'm like, if you can make a pre-gen for me, I will play Champions all day, because it's actually a lot of fun. I quite enjoyed it the few times that I've gotten a chance to play it.
I'm like that, but with like almost everything. Or definitely like if I could just like muddle through coming up with a character and then learn during play. But if you come at me with a 400 page rule book, I'm like, I don't think so.
Well, and there is something to that. My books, again, like I said, are big because I like to throw in lots of examples. Mm-hmm. Like if I stripped out my examples, probably a third of any of my books would just be gone. So that 100-page book would be 70 pages. That 300-page book would be 200 pages, because I would not make it easy for you to understand what I'm actually writing. But I find that stuff to be really helpful. But also I think that there are games that have different levels of buy-in and different levels of necessity of thought on the part of the player. That is actually, I think, one of the things that makes a game like D&D so palatable to so many different people, because you can say, I'm an elven warrior, here are my numbers, let's go. In a game like Part-Time Gods, that's much harder to do, because everything is very floaty. It's all like, you can get like The first thing you come up with is your occupation. That's easy. What do you want your day job to be? It's this. Cool. Pick that thing. It's there on a list. It's wonderful. What kind of personality do you want to have? That's step 2. Cool. You pick that personality. It's wonderful. It's there. All right. Third thing. What kind of god are you? What? You can be the god of anything. What do you want to be the god of? Anything? I can be the god of anything. Yes, you can be the god of anything. Oh gosh. And that's what you run into a lot. And then the fourth step is like, okay, cool. Like, now that you know what you're the god of, how do you interpret your godhood? That's easy. You pick from a theology list, of course. Then step 5 is, what are the things that are important to you as a character? And then it's just like, well, I don't know. Well, are you married? Do you have siblings? Is your job important? Do you have a home that's important, a place, And like, these are the kinds of things that like not everybody thinks of when they're creating characters for any other game, but it's so integral to Part-Time Gods. Because like I've had people who are like, well, I have an assistant. And I'm like, cool, put some points into an assistant. Make sure you write down what their name is. Make sure what your relationship type is with them. We need to put them on the territory grid. Like, there's a bunch of stuff involved if you pick an assistant type. But at the same time, they might just be like, I'm gonna pick an assistant. I'm gonna put all my points into the assistant, so I have one thing that I care about. And I'm like, that's like the easiest thing that you can do in Part-Time Gods when it comes to that step. But then I've had other people who are like, well, I have a gang because I'm a member of a gang, but also my brother, he's always in a lot of trouble, so I'm going to put him down. But also like my hideout, and put my hideout on there. And like, you can kind of build like the things that are important around your character. But what you're doing in that game also is everything that you tell me is now important to your character is like, that's me, that thank you. Now I have things to attack, like as the GM. So when you get players who sometimes it's not even a matter of them not wanting to put enough, like a bunch of effort or anything, but you get those players who are scared of their characters hurting or dying or whatever. So you get those characters who are like super like, well, it's going to be an assistant and they're always with me so that I can defend them just in case anything would ever happen to them. It's just like, okay, cool. I mean, you do you, but like that's just a mentality that I don't have. I like to spread up all my points and like have like a whole bunch of relationships with lots of stuff because I want those things to get threatened because that's the game.
That's the game, yeah.
So that's the game.
Yeah, that kind of goes back to like why I haven't played Call of Cthulhu yet. Mm-hmm. Is because like what you described, that people don't want to play the game. They would want to play it like my impression is just running into people that just want to play it like D&D, and they just try and figure out ways to make their character, who's supposed to be an investigator, more of a combat character, and
right.
That's not the game.
Yeah, exactly. See, I am definitely the type of person, I'm just like, you hear a mysterious noise behind the door. I investigate that. What's that noise? Now, if you're playing Call of Cthulhu, what's behind that door is not good. Like, you do not want to know what's behind that door you don't want your character to know. But if you're playing the game that you've shown up to play, you go and investigate what's behind that door. That's what you do. Like, it's part of the game.
Yeah, when I something like that, I want bad things to happen to my character because that's how the books read. Yeah, nothing but bad things.
Well, and that's again, like, I think that's kind of like it comes across in what you put in the game. Again, kind of to go back to D&D, like, it's high fantasy, it's super adventurous and all of that stuff. That's why 2/3, that's why 1/3 of the book is how to fight things. The other third of the book is here are the things you fight. And then the other third of the book is here's how you make a character to use these rules to fight those things. That's the game. Like, so, there's not huge like political, intrigue and all that stuff in that game. And that's why it's not in the book. Or if it is, it's mentioned very briefly because you can do it, but it's not really what the game supports, but you can do it.
That is the great things about RPGs. So Doug wants to know, at what point do you turn the corner from homebrewing mechanics to add to a game to recognizing it's more sensible to create your own game?
I mean, obviously, if your homebrewed thing doesn't match anything anymore, obviously. But what ends up happening though a lot of the time is what you end up doing homebrewing is making rules that fit more within your idea of how this game should play, but you're still playing that game. I feel like for it to be its own thing, it also kind of needs to have its own lore and its own like reason for existing. So like I think you can homebrew the hell out of a game and it's still that game with your rules on top of it. Um it takes like that special extra spark of inspiration and really attaching the all of these homebrewed mechanics and stuff that you've created to something new that then gives it that push to become something new. Like that's why you end up with so many like fantasy heartbreakers out there, because really that person home D&D, and that's why the game that person created feels like a different version of D&D, and that's why it didn't sell, and that's why they went broke printing 5,000 copies of it. So that's trust. I've heard those stories. Trust me, it has happened several times of people trying to recreate the thing that they love in the game that they're already playing instead of creating something brand new. And that's why all of my games are something brand new. Because if I want to play something high fantasy that's D&D like, I'm just gonna go play D&D. Like, why am I going to try and create a different fantasy game that feels like D&D? Why not just go play D&D? Oh, because it doesn't do this one thing that your house rule does. All right, throw that house rule on top of D&D, but it's still D&D in the end.
Yeah, we often get asked, how do you do this with D&D? And often our answer is, why?
Yeah.
Don't. There's a game that does that, called that. Do that.
One of my very favorite game. That's one of my favorite things is every year I go to Dragon Con. Except this year, obviously. But every year I go to Dragon Con as a guest, and usually they put me on a panel with Jason Bullman. Sorry, I forgot his last name for a second. Jason Bullman from Paizo. And it's usually the two of us, and it's usually like a game mastering, panel. So somebody will come up and say like, I'm playing Paizo's, Pathfinder, and I have this group that's doing this and this and this. How do I get them to do this and this and this? And Jason will say exactly what that person wanted to hear, because they came to this one with Jason Bullman to hear Jason Bullman's answer within the Pathfinder D&D mythos and that area of brain space. And then my answer would be, what you're trying to get your group to do, that's not what that game is designed for. You need to go play this game over here because it does exactly what you're asking, but just asks you also to go ahead and learn a different system. And it's fun, actually. It's fun every year that I get to basically be the dissenting voice on most of the panels. But I'm also kind of that, I feel like I'm that voice that I think people need to hear that, because and again, it's not a strike against any of the larger companies, but like if you ask the random, role player out there, they think that there was maybe 5 or 6 companies that make a couple of games a piece, and because those are the ones that have marketing budgets, and they're the ones that can get on TV and on like all these big high scale things, and like they're the ones that have the capital to push their games in your face. But really, there's hundreds and hundreds of companies, and they make multiple games. Like, my company is only one of those. I have like 7 games I'm working on, an 8th and a 9th. It's like that's and I'm not a representative of a lot of different. Most companies, like, they'll create one game, they'll support that game, and then they'll go with that. I do like to jump around. I don't like to just do one thing like ever. But that's kind of the mentality when it comes to gamers, and that's why like I think it's important. And I've talked with the gaming programmer at DragonCon, and he's told me several times, he's like, that's why I have you come, because you have that voice of the indie, the small publishing, that these people who are coming to DragonCon, 90% of them are D&D and Pathfinder players, and they need to hear about these other games. They need to hear that there's other things out there. which not everybody hears about.
Yeah, unfortunately, I feel like there's this like huge missed opportunity with these companies that get these popular licenses. Now, it might not be their fault. It might just be because the way the licenses are written, they're kind of stuck, right? But they get these licenses and then they market them to role players, right? RPG enthusiasts, right? Which doesn't actually really do much of anything for the hobby. You're just like preaching to the choir. They never seem to like get penetration into that fandom and draw non-role players into the hobby. And then we would hear more of people actually like, oh, my first game was this, and not be D&D, because it's like D&D is the gateway drug to RPGs, and then eventually like they're like, well, how do I do this other thing with D&D? And then they might discover that there's another game, and they might actually learn them. But there's like a lag, right? So we're seeing this renaissance of D&D. And most of the third party publishers or indie games, they're like, well, we're not really seeing it. And I think there's going to be like possibly 3 to 5 years of lag before it kind of like bleeds into the rest of the market.
Well, I would agree with that because I feel like I think there are there's gateway games into the hobby, and then there are gateway games that just get you into that thing. Like marijuana is a gateway drug, or whatever. Crack makes you do crack. Like if you start doing crack, you don't go on to other things. You just take crack. Like it's just what you do. So I feel like D&D is crack, is what I'm saying. Yeah. You can quote me on that. I don't care. But no. But what ends up happening is people get into D&D and then they just play D&D. I had the benefit of coming in playing Rifts, for instance. So, and one of the interesting things, and might be why, I'm completely flawed in terms of marketing. You can't market an Eloy Lasanta game to one particular type of gamer because everything I come out with is different. But when I started with Rifts, we had Palladium Fantasy, we had Heroes Unlimited. We were still even staying within the same system, but they came out with so many different things. Hellspawn, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Ninjas and Super Spies, and they all use the same system, but they were all different experiences. And that's kind of what I enjoyed about that. So I got in using Palladium, Rifts specifically, and I didn't have to find anything new for a long time, because every time I wanted something new, Palladium had something new for me, until I actually was like, well, let me go try out this other game. Somebody think it's called Vampire or something like that. So let me go try out that game. I like vampires. Let's try it. And then I was like, whoa, this system is completely different. And I've always been a system guy, so like for me, it's always been like, what systems can I latch on to? I think I was role playing for, I don't know, maybe 6, 7, maybe 8 years before I ever played D&D. I was already playing all those other games. Toon. I played Toon. I played so many games before I ever tried D&D for the first time.
You're definitely a minority there for sure. Definitely. The early days of TSR, oddly enough, they did have a bunch of other games, and pretty much all of them were a different system. Like, maybe although. D&D does one thing well, and that's D&D. It's not a highly adaptable system.
Right.
I think like maybe Gamma World was a little bit tweaked, off of the D&D system at the time, but everything else, Top Secret, Marvel Superheroes, they were all their own systems.
Yeah.
Star Frontiers, which so I guess maybe they weren't super successful in branching out the way maybe Palladium was, because once you knew how to play Palladium, you knew how to play all the games. It's just like how they redressed it. So I don't know where I was going with that.
I mean, you're correct. Yes, good point made.
Yeah. So what? Obviously, this year has been canceled. What are you looking forward to in 2021 when the world reopens? You mentioned Dragon Con, going there every year as a guest.
Yeah, Dragon Con is a big one for me. I just love the people at that convention. It's also like I don't know, for me it's very low key. Like I can kind of go there and I can do my thing on the panels and talk with fans and, you know, have fun. But then then I'm just another con goer and then I can just go have fun with everybody else. It's a little bit different than like going to an RPG convention where you are the guest and it's like in big letters and stuff. At Dragon Con, you're just one of the hundreds and hundreds of things that people can go and, you know, check out. But that's where I get to go and I get to hang out. Like last year I met Emma Caulfield from Buffy. You know, like that was fun. Like that was really a lot of fun. So I mean, like I get to go and talk with like all the fun artists, and there's just a lot of fun to be had at Dragon Con, even if you're not a guest. So I go, I do my, you know, like I think last year I think it was on like 5 or 6 panels. But you know, 5 or 6 panels is, what is that? 5 or 6 hours of an entire 4-day weekend.
Yeah.
So it's like, that's like nothing in, you know, in the grand scheme of things. So, so Dragon Con, definitely. I actually had no plans on going to Gen Con this year, but I was going to try and go next year. So that actually kind of works out because nobody's going this year. So I'm going to try and end up going next year and having a booth again. It's been a couple of years now, this year and last year, since I've been to Gen Con. But I'm also going to try and do Origins. So there's some different things that I'm going to try and do. But also, I mean, it's just all those little cons. Like I'm not going to be able to go to Con on the Cob this year that I was planning on going to. That's run by Andy Hopp, who is awesome. So, you know, there's a lot of stuff. But mostly, when I'm not at conventions, I'm doing game design. So, you know, I have my own personal kind of games and stuff that I'm working on that I'm excited to finally show off one day. That they're just always perpetually in the works. One of the games that I'm working on right now, I have literally been working on for 4 years. And it's one of those things where like it took me, this might sound weird, but every game that I design is basically helping me work out ideas for the next game. So, you know, like Part-Time Gods should have been my first game, but there were things in the system that didn't necessarily work the way that I wanted that game to come out. So they did work for API. So then when I was working on Ninja Crusade, I was like, the next game was supposed to be Part-Time Gods. And I'm like, well, I still just can't figure out that thing that I want in Part-Time Gods. So then the next game ended up becoming Ninja Crusade because I was like, oh, well, I figured out how this can work there, but not that other thing, that other idea that I have. So it took me a while to get, you know, Part-Time Gods even off of the ground. Sins of the Father didn't fall under that. Sins of the Father, I wrote that game in 2 weeks. Like, I had an idea, I sat down in front of my computer, wrote it every day of those 2 weeks. I wrote, and then at the end of 2 weeks, it was done, and I handed it off to my editor, and you know, then made sure that it all made sense because I've never written a game that fast. And I was like, does this make sense? And then I took it around and we played it a bunch. Made sure that it actually worked in practice. And then once I was done with that, I was like, oh, well, I guess we can release it then. Let's do that. So
that makes sense. You're not the first person to basically tell me that they had to grow into the game they wanted to make originally. Yeah. A friend of mine is like, hey, come over. Yeah, we were introduced by a mutual friend, and he wanted us to play test the game, and we did. And he's produced two other tabletop games and a third RPG game that's just funded on Kickstarter that he's a part of, and still hasn't made that one game that they, you know, initially set out to make.
Right.
You know, it's just not there yet. And I, you know, actually, the other friends that helped them get their other games off the ground and kind of get it and break in are the same way. They've produced 3-4 games already. And yet the game we initially met them through playtesting still isn't a game yet. So it's fair. So I think it's fairly common.
Yeah. The game for me right now is my game called Sinister Beasts, which was a game that I announced I started working on like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago. I started work on it. And it's my like RPG take on like a darker kind of style Pokemon. Like, and the setting's really good, but for me, I've still just been battling, like, how do the monsters work, and like, how do I make this feel like really good, you know? Because I've had a lot of iterations. I've had like 3 iterations of it so far that I've play tested privately, and each one of them, built upon the one before it. But it's really just trying to figure out like what I really want this game to feel like, and I want it to feel like it's not just Pokemon, because then just go play Pokemon Go, because it's just about catching stuff and battling. I need to have more than that in there as well. So that's the core conceit of it, is that it's a Pokemon style kind of RPG. But if you watch the cartoon for Pokemon or anything like it, it's all right, cool. We're wandering to the next thing so we can fight, and then we wander to the next thing after that so we can fight, and then to the next thing after that so we can fight. And that's not the kind of game that I would want to make, because that's more for a video game, which is why it's so successful as a video game. Also, gosh, I've spent so much money on art over the last 4 years, because what I've been doing is I keep testing out different artists. I'll find an artist and I'll be like, could they do the style of art that I'm looking for Sinister Beasts? So I'll throw them a few $100s and they'll give me some stuff back, and I'll be like, that's just not it. I think I've gotten 4 or 5 different artists that I've thrown hundreds of dollars at. I've wasted a bunch of money, I guess, because I'm not going to use any of the stuff that I paid them for. Just trying to get the right feel for the game, and it's either too cartoony, or it's not cartoony enough, or it feels too anime, or they just don't understand when I'm writing down I want this type of thing, and then they interpret a different thing, which means even if it looked good, I can't really work with that artist. It's so hard. It's so hard to get this game out. I don't know why. Maybe one day. It's already it's 60% written. It literally, I could probably take what I've written, hand it to my team, and they could finish it really fast. But I need to have that on this game. I need to know that it's going to be exactly right, by my standards.
You have to mind meld with various artists until you find the one that melds properly.
Yes, and I've met a few artists that I can give them one line of text and be like, I kind of want something like this, and then they'll just be like, bam, and I'll be like, that's exactly what I wanted. Thank you. And then I've worked with other artists that I have to write 2 or 3 paragraphs to describe every little detail, and then it might come out okay. And it's not that their art is bad, it's just that our length, maybe the mind meld hasn't happened. So
you're not vibing.
Right. So I do hold on. Any artist that I can really get that gets what I'm doing and understands it, those are the ones that I keep around. That's why you'll see a lot of the same art even across different game lines. You'll see a lot of the same style art, because I'll be like, that guy, I can tell him something to do and he just does it.
Yeah.
Or Jan Galino is one that I use a lot. Daniel Oshoki, I use him a lot. Melissa Gay, I used to use a lot before she started making real money off of her art. And then, I feel bad offering her pennies what she's worth. So I stopped asking her, but only because I don't think I can afford her. But her art is amazing.
Yeah.
I have a few different artists that I just love so much. Yeah, there you go.
No, I totally get it. I have a friend, and they asked an artist to do something for them, and I was like, oh, you should have just talked to me first. I would have told you not to bother, because I know you're not gonna want to pay, or they were just naive. They just didn't know. Yeah. What artists cost, what they're worth. So I was like, you could have just saved yourself some time and embarrassment.
Well, yeah, and that's why I'm still really great friends with Melissa, and anytime I can see her at a convention, we give each other a big hug and everything, and I gawk at all of her amazing art, and I go, man, I wish I could afford you. So
I totally get that vibe, and it's we are just starting to move into the domain where we publish physical things, and before that everything is digital. So I'll see an artist and I'll be like, hey, this looks awesome, what are your rates? And they'll give me the rates, and I'll go, I'd have to sell thousands and thousands of those to break even. So
and our hobby isn't that big, sadly.
Yes. But you work where you can, and that's why we're excited about starting to get physical products, because you can charge a little bit more, and it's easier to get that art in there. And we have crowdfunding. Like Kickstarter is
Well, and that's one of the things too I've said this before on various podcasts and whatnot, but like the RPG industry rewards longevity. So like it was really hard to get people to try out my first game, but it was slightly easier to get people to try out my second game. Nowadays, if I release a game, I already have a bunch of people who are ready to play it. Just because I'm a known factor. I've been around a while, you know? So now if I release a game, not only, all I have to do is talk about that I'm working on a game, and I get a lot of playtesting requests, you know, because they're like, ooh, I want to know what the next thing you're working on is, you know? But then when the game comes out, it has an automatic, you know, kind of audience. And that's like, I kind of said this earlier, but like, I have a certain audience for each of my different games that is like locked into that. But then I also have a very small group that they're not necessarily a fan of any particular game of mine. They're a fan of mine. So if I release a game, they buy a thing because I made it. And I thank those people a lot. Thank you so much for that. I've been trying to figure out how to get more of those. Because I have AMP fans, and I have Part-Time Gods fans, and I have API fans, and I have Ninja Crusade fans, and they don't necessarily mix. They're not necessarily the same players, which is great for me because I get to get engaged with a lot of different types of players. But I'm always looking to make those certain ones that are like, I just love all of these, and I'm like, you're my favorite person ever. So.
Yeah, I mean that is part of the trick. You know, it's hard too because when you're producing an RPG. You're asking for a lot from a person comparatively speaking, right? They get a lot for their money, a lot of value, but at the same time, like they have to absorb this new rule set. Then they have to lobby their friends to play this new game, and so if it falls flat in any of those areas, like that's wasted of investment for them, and not just money, like the time. Yeah. It's not like if you pick up a comic book and you read it and you don't like it, you just don't get another one. But it really didn't cost you much, right? You didn't have to put up much capital in time, effort, energy. Same thing with most other things, but RPGs are different, right? You're gonna have to learn this book, and then you're gonna have to learn all these rules, and then you got to get all your friends, or at least enough of them to play the game, and convince them to play it with you and possibly buy it as well. I mean, which is also a good thing, because then we get to sell more books.
Well, which is where making games based on existing systems and stuff. That's why there are companies who make real good bank by doing that. Like Magpie Games is a good example of that. They arguably make the best Powered by the Apocalypse games out there in the industry, and there are a lot of companies who make those. Because they're working off of the Powered by the Apocalypse World engine, and there's a lot of appeal to that type of system, so everybody wants to jump on it and make those games. Magpie has gotten good at making games, so not only do they make games for a system that you like, but they are really good at it. So they release games that you're like, this is amazing, and basically if they ever made a bad one, it like their stock would just tank. So like that's why they put so much work into every single one of those that they release. But it's kind of like if they were to come out with a game that used their original rules and stuff like that wasn't a Powered by the Apocalypse game, they would have obviously those Magpie fans who would just buy that game, but it would be a much harder sell because it's not already based on something that is a known entity. Yeah,
the known factor is huge. We are past the hour mark by a bit now.
Was this supposed to go for an hour? I thought this was just talking for as long as we had stuff to talk about. But
sometimes it works that way too. But no, I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm every time I get to talk with you, I enjoy it. Although I feel like a lot of times it's like at conventions and we're on escalators going in the opposite directions. But no, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. Final thoughts before we head out?
I mean, final thoughts. I know that, Third Eye Games has been kind of quiet recently, like for the last quarantine time. Yeah. But, we are actually coming back out to keep a lookout for the PIP Worlds, the community content thing that's coming to Drive-Thru RPG. Definitely, as soon as that is a thing, I think it'll take maybe a few weeks to get everything set up. We're already in talks of we're already setting it up. So probably either late July or maybe early August. So it'll be available, and I'm excited for some of the initial products that are actually going to be in the community content store, because we coordinated with some other writers who were interested in using it, and we're coordinating the launch. So that should be really cool. So immediately when we say, hey, there's community content, there's going to be some there, which is nice. But
will you guys have
and
your own section? Like, will it be part of Drive Through RPG, or will it be its own thing?
it's going to be part of Drive Through RPG. So
Okay.
yeah, and my goal for a long time has been to have the pip system listed as one of the systems, like when you go to the list of systems. Like that was my goal. It's like I don't want to link every game that I have to other system. I want my systems to be listed there.
Well, congratulations on that.
Exactly. Well, I don't think it's happened yet, but it's going to happen very soon.
Yeah. Well, I'm anticipating it'll get wrapped up, and it will happen.
I think it will. But definitely check that out. Obviously, we have games for all the other game lines, AMP API, Ninja Crusade, Part-Time Gods, and the Pip World stuff. We have all of that stuff coming out. We have new games we're working on. Lots and lots of fun stuff. I'm excited for I'm starting to get like inspired again and back into the writing. So I've been doing that, last couple of weeks I've started doing that a little bit more. So as that starts pumping up, we're going to have a lot more things to release. And so thank you to everybody who's still out there kind of supporting us, and who's, checking out my YouTube channel. I post stuff there. Again, quarantine time, I haven't posted anything for a little bit, but I did post a new video yesterday. So, definitely check out the YouTube channel as well.
Yep. In the pinned comment below, you can find links to Eloy. Go check them out. Till next time, stay nerdy.
Bye, guys.